Welcome to Hidden Layers, where we explore the people and the tech behind artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Ron Green, and I'm excited to be joined today by Dr. Larry Gray to discuss computational thinking and its growing importance in this new age of AI. Dr. Larry Gray works as a director of engineering at KUNGFU.AI and received his PhD from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He's deeply committed to open source and is a major contributor to the Yellow Brick project. He's also a board member of NumFocus. He's renowned for his dedication to the Python language and ecosystem, and he extends his expertise beyond the industry by teaching and developing courses at Georgetown University, where he holds a position as an adjunct professor and program director for data analytics. Welcome, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you've got a new book coming out later this year on computational thinking. Let's kick off with a definition of computational thinking to kind of ground the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So the way that I envision computational thinking, it is first ideal of problem solving, right? And the way that you approach problem solving. And the way that this is set up is that you try to look at your problem into like modular ways and to breaking things apart into manageable tasks. And so if you're able to do this and keep going deeper and deeper and making things smaller and smaller, you get down to a problem that is a single problem that can be solved, right? And once you have that single problem, you can build back up into a more complex system. So this type of thinking is not generally taught to non-computer science majors,
Right.
But I think it's practical and useful for those outside of computer science.
I totally agree. I actually had a really interesting experience early in my undergrad years where I was in my first computer science course and I'd done a little bit of programming. And I got stuck on the very first assignment, and I remember going to the grad student helping us, and in a very sort of Socratic method, he helped me break down the problem and decompose it into smaller sub-problems. And I'll never forget, a light went off, and from that moment on, I really never struggled with decomposing problems again. It was almost like he opened a door to a whole new world that I didn't know existed, and it was really, I think, a foundational experience for me. I didn't know it was called computational thinking back then, but that's I think that's a bit of a new term. So with the focus on Python in your career, you also believe pretty strongly that Python is a unique language, a unique high-order language that's maybe perfectly suited for computational thinking. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it all begins with the syntax of Python and along with readability. So whenever you see Python compared to languages such as C, Java, or whatever, you can immediately pretty much figure out that things say, if you see print hello world in C, it looks weird. If you see print hello world in JavaScript, it looks weird. But if you see it in Python, without having any knowledge, you say, well, probably it prints hello world.
Right.
And so the syntax becomes easier, and just some of also the conventions that are built into Python and the way things are spaced. Python is a space-based language, so things are spread out and they easy to read, which is one of the things that's highly important, is that you can actually go between lines of code and read it in a way that it's fluent and it seems to logically get pieced together. So it really, the focus on this and why it's good for computational thinking is it allows you to easily understand the code that you're working on. And if you're able to do that and break it down to single statement, problem statements, it's easier to build that back up into complex solutions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about Python being sort of an ideal language for people first getting into either programming or thinking about computational thinking. The lack of curly brackets and semicolons is just such a bonus. Well, you also have, Larry, a very unique personal journey, and you've been very generous in sharing this. I know you've given presentations at Strange Loop and other places about this. Can you talk a little bit about your academic journey and kind of how you arrived at this passion for computational thinking?
Yeah, so my story really begins, or there's an impetus for everything that happened for me. And that impetus was the diagnosis of me being bipolar.
In what year was that? How old were you?
And that was in 2013.
Okay.
So about 10 years ago. And prior to that, in order to understand my story fully, you have to understand what I was doing prior to this. I was admitted to Hopkins. I was working on a world-class problem. In my heart of hearts, I felt that I was going to get a Nobel Prize because I was discovering something that was pivotal for my field. I was going to be able to diagnose the genetic disorder and also treat it. And I was heading that direction. Sadly, my grandmother passed away. And it was pretty rough for me. I went through a lot of grief because for her and me, I grew up extremely poor. And she lived close to me out in the country, and it was so different of a space for me than being in this small town. There were fruit trees everywhere. There was always cake and cookies in the kitchen. There was just hard candy that only grandmas and grandpas have around.
For whatever reason.
And there was like vegetable gardens and watermelon and all this stuff going. And she was one of the kindest person I ever met. And the values that she lived by were kindness and gratitude. And that's what I love my life by now, by those principles. And so it was a big deal for me. But that grief slowly changed into depression. And at first, I thought it was something manageable that I can just naturopathically go and work out. Like I can just exercise. I can just
just sheer willpower.
Yeah, sheer willpower. I can lead a clean life, and that would get it. But it just got worse and worse. This is kind of contradictory. Here I am, a researcher. I was against taking medication, despite the fact that I was in a laboratory trying to discover treatments for other disorders, which is kind of weird. But one of the bravest moments of my life is that I decided I was going to take medication in order to treat this. My treatment regimen ended up being, over a course of 10 years, I was on like 15 different medications. Nothing seems to work. But during this period, I got my PhD, which was very hard. My cognitive ability had decreased so much that for my dissertation, I spoke my dissertation to my wife line by line, and it took me like 3 minutes in order to formulate a sentence.
And you had to dictate it because it was the only way you could get it out of your mind at that point.
Get it out. And so I went on, and I realized that I was struggling so much in a laboratory, and that I wanted to move into something that was a little bit more energizing, and I decided to go into computational biology. I would do more computational work. And during that time, I got introduced to Python. And immediately, those problems that I was having with my cognitive ability start to alleviate. I couldn't do anything else. There was nothing in my life. I wasn't, I had trouble sleeping. Every element that comes with being in a depressive state was just so inhibiting me. But I could sit down and actually write Python code. And slowly, I started seeing these executive functions coming back. Like the more and more I studied it, the more and more I became to learn how to approach problems, it started working. And over the years, I started getting better. This is also in conjunction with medication, but I really contribute what I like to say, Python saved my life, wholeheartedly. Like I truly believe that because it let me rehabilitate my thinking, all right? And so that was just my point that I became like a huge advocate for Python and for learning how to think differently. and how to approach problems differently and use a language to do that. So in my book, I really emphasize that this isn't just for technical people. This is for everyday people. It could be for a social worker, that you can change the way that you think about how you solve problems, because in the future, we're going to really be problem solvers. That's the jobs that we're going to hold. And so how you approach thinking about problems is going to be important, and Python could be that tool in order to help you achieve success.
So it sounds like Python it was almost like a ladder to get out of the hole you were in. It gave you the power to get out of that do you think it was through the simplifying and forcing you to break things down into sort of bite-sized components in the way that you're talking about computational thinking?
Yeah, single thoughts. Like I could focus on a single thought.
Okay. And
that enabled me, my brain could wrap around that, right? And then immediately I would build upon that. This was the way that I thought before, which I still do, is what made me a great researcher, I can go in, see a problem, and almost immediately come to some hypothesis about what the problem was. I didn't need to know all of the pieces, but I could actually come up with a solution. But that was never, it wasn't like computational thinking. It was just
it was almost instinct or
instant intuition.
Insights. Yeah.
And I lost that ability to do that, right? And so I had to rebuild a certain way to actually be very logical in the way that I approach problems. I slowly regained that ability to look at whole problems and come to some solution or hypothesis about how to test that. But Python definitely is a savior.
Have you run across anybody else? I know you teach a lot in person and online. Have you run across anybody else who's had a bit of a similar experience like that?
Well, I've come across one person that said that they were dealing with depressive issues, and that what's really helping them get through everything is Python. And so there is some people out there, and I know there's probably more that have been exposed to that. So I don't have any other evidence of this, but there's I think the way that what they've learned about Python in the areas of the brain of just programming where it affects is within these regions of executive function and things like that. So it makes sense that if these areas of the brain are being stimulated by Python and learning how to think in this way, that and these are the regions that programming is actually affecting, it makes perfect sense that Python could actually activate those neural pathways.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the intersection of computational thinking and AI in the coming field. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what, a minute ago you said you think computational thinking, problem solving is going to be core to the sort of AI-driven world we're going into. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why do you think it's important for people, even in non-technical fields, to start embracing computational thinking?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about AI. Given there are going to be some issues and disparities that are come about from its adoption, I think humans are going to have an amazing life. And that's because they will augment us and allow us to be problem solvers, right? So you can imagine the social worker that spends a lot of her time doing casework, right? Instead of actually doing social justice that she's meant to do and solve problems for people, right? You can have AI do the casework for you, right? I think it's going to allow us to do more human intelligence and more creativity. It's going to free us up to do things that are really human.
Completely agree.
And so we have emotional, the use for emotional intelligence is going to increase. the use for being able to socialize with people and do very social interactions are going to increase. And these are the things that are not readily and easily duplicated by AI. And so those skills are going to have to come to the forefront. And it's going to be great because I think people, as a people, we want more challenging, more complex issues to solve. And so those other things that are taken away, because as we know that AI will probably reduce 80% of process-oriented jobs.
Right.
So we're left with higher order thinking jobs. And I think that we can use tools like Python to prepare people to do those types of higher order thinking jobs, or at least learn that approach. Right.
I completely agree. I share your optimism. I think that there are going to be, there are going to be a lot of people who have their jobs disrupted, and there will probably be jobs that are completely eliminated. But AI is also going to enable, I think, entirely new categories of capabilities that some you can kind of imagine. Some I think we have no idea, because it's such a powerful tool, and it's we're at really at day one in that exploration.
I think this is going to be we're in a great place. I think us at KUNGFU are in a great and unique position that we get to envision how the world is going to be, and we can provide solutions for that new world. Before it happens, like, what is this world going to look like to now? And now we can provide those types of solutions. And this is being able to do that is those that are able to envision what the future will look like are those that are going to be successful and being able to make a big difference.
What about minority groups? What about people who are maybe less fortunate and maybe already marginalized? Yeah. There's a real danger there, right? About AI potentially increasing the discrepancy and the disparity there. Have you thought about that much?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it lately, and it made me really, really sad. I think coming from a very educated background, I tend to forget that everyone is not educated, right? It just becomes, because I'm around PhDs all the time, and so you tend to not believe that. And for those jobs that are going to go away are highly occupied by, like, blacks. Like, those jobs that are moving away, and these are jobs that are meant to catapult them into higher paying jobs. But if they're eliminated, there's no path in order to get to these higher paying positions. And what they predict in a study by McKinsey is that there's going to be like a $45 billion wealth gap that's going to emerge over the next 10 years along racial lines from black and white, the difference. And it's going to be devastating. And so solutions for that is me thinking we need to get Python in the hands of people now, of kids, of people to think differently, because I was trained as a scientist. I was trained on scientific thinking, right? And I do that naturally, but not everyone has that exposure. And so if we can get people to think differently and think about the world in a different way of how they solve their everyday problems, and this isn't just they could actually maybe get a leg up on the types of jobs that are going to be coming down the pipeline. And this is going to be so my role now is to be more making people more aware of this, because I wasn't aware, right? There's an awareness that needs to go along with blacks in technology. So of executives in technology right now, about only 3% are black. So there's a huge difference. And so one of the solutions is to get more blacks into positions in technology and things like that. And so just not being aware and how privileged I am, like, I look around, it's like, man, I'm in AI and I'm black and I'm in a leadership position. Like, I'm probably less than 0.5% of all people out there. And so that kind of drives me to be, to have some sort of conviction that this there should be more awareness around this topic.
Well, and you've done an enormous amount of mentoring and teaching and giving back to the community. Open source. I mentioned earlier you have an entire introductory course on Python. We'll put a link. We'll put a link in the show notes for that. Are you seeing more people from different backgrounds increasingly come into your circle teaching Python, or has it remained relatively steady state over the years as far as the background of people you're seeing coming in?
So the background that I'm seeing like at Georgetown, I see a lot of minorities that are coming in, especially in the data science space. One of the issues is that, and this is the case, they come in less prepared than most students. And so that's a challenge that we have to face whenever we're hiring interns, we're hiring people, is that someone might come in with a little less skills than others, but it's definitely an increase in the number of minorities that are trying to enter this. I see this, I'm mentoring like 4 people right now, and they're all African-American males that just seek me out and say, I really need some direction. And so there's a demand, and there's the reality of it that I tell them is it's going to be a struggle. I know when I first tried to get my first job, it took me 9 months to get someone to believe in me, right? And to try to convey that to them, that it's going to be a struggle. But as much as I really don't think about race a lot, but others actually see me and think this is someone that I can kind of go to and knows what I might be struggling with or whatever.
Yeah, what they may have been going through.
Might be going through. So I've opened myself to that experience.
That is just fantastic. I think it's incumbent upon all of us, getting that first job in the tech business or whatever career you're trying to switch into, getting that first role is so difficult, and I think it's critical for people like us to pay it back, and help people enter this. And in fact, you and I see this all the time, Larry, where there are people who are trying to break into the AI world, right? Break into data science or AI or machine learning, and it's just such a steep learning curve. They don't know where to start. And I think, your course on Python is the perfect entry, because with that, you'll learn the dominant language that's used within our field, and you'll learn the basics of computational thinking, which I think are critical. Okay, well, I'd love to end today's episode with asking you just kind of our standard wrap-up question, which is, on a personal level, if you could have AI automate something for you, make your life better day to day, what would you pick?
A snowblower. Without question. Something that I can just, even if it was remote control and I don't care. Like, that's the vein of my existence, is having to shovel snow.
I love it.
And so getting something out there that truly, like a Roomba for my driveway.
I love it. Well, that's probably in the near term. I think that's totally achievable. Well, Larry, thank you so much for coming on. This was a total blast, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you.